Hello and welcome to the Digital Insight, the technology and supply chain podcast that delivers valuable C-level perspective into the core issues surrounding business transformation and digital disruption. Each episode will bring you the most inspiring executive insights from those leading transformation strategies within the world's biggest and best-known companies. The Digital Insight. Disrupt, transform, evolve.
Welcome to the Digital Insight, the exclusive podcast series for CPO Strategy and Interface magazines. This week is part 2 of a 6-part supply chain masterclass with Frank Vorrath, Executive Partner Supply Chain at Gartner. Frank has years of experience working on the front line of supply chain management, and this week he's detailing the hidden potential of a strategy-driven supply chain. Frank, welcome to the Digital Insight.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so today we're talking about the kind of strategy-driven supply chain. You've identified some serious unlocked strategic potential of supply chain. What sort of first alerted you to this?
Yeah, I have been working for some time with Professor Dr. Bram Desmates, and he wrote for me one of the most profounding and excellent business strategy and supply chain strategy books called Supply Chain Strategy and Financial Metrics. Now, while I was actually in contact with him, I had a privilege to contribute to the book with a foreword and also with a business case study on my previous work with a company called Johnson Controls. Now, that encouraged me to look into the concept and everything which is around a business transformation and supply chain, to take more a strategic approach to it, leading up to Bram and myself working on a concept called the strategy-driven supply chain, and also the strategy-driven value planning and execution model. And that's being described in a recent HBR white paper, an article we have recently submitted, where we obviously asking for certain changes to take on the supply chain on a more strategic level.
The white paper, which is, a fascinating read, is kind of really putting supply chain front and forward, isn't it?
Yeah, it does, and somewhere highlights also some of the issues that companies are going through an enormous amount of change. We know that probably 63% of all companies confirmed by their CEOs are going through a business model change over the next couple of years. Now, what we also highlighting is that lots of companies are overly focusing on growth and margin improvement, and have somewhere a lack in focus on shareholder value. And that's measured in a metrics called return on capital employed. And we're highlighting also that the problem is that companies don't have enough understanding of the true role of their supply chain and how to balance service cost and capital employed within, as Bram calls it, the supply chain triangle. Now, what we're also saying that a better understanding would lead to sharper strategies and stronger execution, and as a result of that, to more sustainable performance and results. So it's really that sustainable performance and results aspect which comes through, and we believe that now it looks like a perfect storm, and that supply chain is on the front of it, and that supply chain seen from an entity point of view and not just from a functional point of view is really so important to companies, leading companies through this change of taking it to the next level. And that's why we call that companies have a different supply chains, and each of these supply chain needs to be strategy driven. So we're also saying that different strategies leading to different supply chains with different targets and different trade-offs for service cost and capital employed. And somewhere we also highlighting the fact that some people believing that a supply chain strategy is simply following a business strategy or from the business strategy. But we also do believe that that is not a sequential process, and that the value proposition and the supply chain are like, we call it the yin and the yang of the business strategy, and that only together they define how a business generates shareholder value as measured by the return of capital employed. So it's really that aspect of looking into supply chain from the driving value for customers and for the business, and that a supply chain delivers on the promise a business is making through their value proposition.
I guess in a way it's kind of an evolution from its kind of traditional operational kind of back end function.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we also saying that by asking the question of, so what actually is supply chain management, and we do believe that supply chain management is more about balancing the supply chain triangle of service, cost, and cash, and also facilitating the internal debate between sales, operations, and finance, and somewhat takes on the role of balancing these kind of trade-off decisions. So now that also requires that now the supply chain probably is coming, as you said before, from the back room into the front room, even is becoming an equal partner around the C-suite. And hence, we also talking about putting the supply chain or chief supply chain officer into a more strategic role. And that would require people operating on that level having also probably more financial and also strategic skills, as instead of in the past having just operational skills and being measured on their operational skills and the execution.
And have you seen examples of that in action now?
Well, we see companies where you would say taking a more strategic approach. We also seeing companies where previously people who actually leading the supply chain becoming the chief executive officer. You have seen that with companies in the US like Apple, Tim Cook, who has been leading the supply chain for Apple for many years under Steve Jobs, and he is the one now leading the organization. Now that's a very good example when you look into how supply chain becomes more a competitive advantage for an organization, and when an organization takes it really seriously and understands having a great supply chain versus a not so good supply chain, and how important it is when somebody is leading the organization that he has that skill set of operationally, financially, and also strategically, which is where we predict also the future skills requirements of chief supply chain officers in many companies going forward.
I mean, obviously that would require quite a big kind of cultural shift and a lot of change management within companies, which I guess, would be, integral to an evolution of this kind.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we say that it takes probably a leap jump, and in terms of maturity of organizations, and also changing and shifting their paradigms from where they are today to where they need to be in future. Now that requires, first of all, awareness creation. So that's why we actually started to work on the concept of the strategy-driven supply chain and pushing that forward, even knowing that this is maybe 5 to 10 years out because of maybe organizations are not there yet. But starting the debate and starting the awareness creation really helps to facilitate and moving the needle up, and also having organization taking a more serious look into that, what it means to them, and also what it means to the overall strategy deployment process in the organization. So what we found also that organizations somewhere took their eye off, driven maybe by growth initiatives, without a truly understanding the strategy behind that, in a way of their value proposition, in a way of the complexity in their business, the way of really having an understanding how they want to differentiate themselves in the marketplace and what it means in terms of the service they have to deliver, the corresponding cost, as well as the capital employed in their environment. So we really focusing on helping organizations by highlighting the problem or the potential issue, but also giving a solution and the approach and taking a different, more strategic approach in future, and then also some are highlighting how the supply chain triangle can be balanced differently by promoting the chief supply chain officer into a more strategic role in an environment.
And I guess that would mean him or her kind of reporting on a sort of peer-to-peer basis, I guess, to a CEO, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an equal partner in the business, and with the same level of importance like other people in the C-suite, like CFOs or COOs, where the chief supply chain officer actually almost becomes, as we would call that in the paper, the wingman, or it could be wing woman as well, to be also diverse, and really helping the CEO and the entire leadership of the company, including board of directors, making better informed decisions, or as I would call that, deliberate choices.
And I guess the genius of that is that the supply chain function has a wealth of data and knowledge and insight which is readily available.
Yeah, but it's also, how do you really want to deal with balancing the triangle? And if you think about you know a supply chain, and a mission of a supply chain, maybe delivering the right product at the right time, at the lowest cost, with the lowest inventory. Does that work? No, it doesn't. So there is conflict in the triangle all the times about service you want to give to your customers. And when you talk about service, it's not only how you move your products and deliver them on time and full. It's also in terms of the product's complexity. It's about the order flexibility you want to give the product portfolio as such. But also having that an understanding of what it means in terms of the cost you're going to have in your organization, and also the capital employed. And when I talk about the capital employed, is really about two elements: the working capital, and that's sometimes also the decisions you have to make to strategically keep a certain inventory level in your organization, or also how you deploy your assets. And when I talk about that, is the fixed asset structure. Now, if you think about that in the dimension of conflicts in the triangle, you could also say, when you think about the critical stakeholders in your business and your head of sales and marketing or VP of sales, what he really cares about is probably the sales, the top line, and market share. When you think about the COO or head of production, probably the primary concern is about efficiency, as efficiency drives cost. But if you think about the VP of sourcing or purchasing, it's probably about the spend and how the company can buy more volume at a lower cost. Now, that's conflict, and now you look even further and say, what's the CFO doing in an organization? He's probably driven by investors, and investors having a view more on lower inventories and free up cash. Now that's the conflict. So now the question is, who's going to be best positioned in a company to balance that? Decisions and probably also people being driven differently in terms of service cost and cash. Now, the best positioned person to do that also strategically would be the CSCO or the Chief Supply Chain Officer. So now that is a big change for organizations to understand. But if they do so, that can really set them up for a very successful future, being on a new or operating on a new competitive level than maybe others can't.
And I believe you say in the white paper that you could envisage a situation where the CSCO could actually evolve into a successful CEO.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a prediction. Professor Dr. Brahma Desmates and myself are making, that you will see that more and more happening in future in organizations where successful CSCOs who has the skill sets of operational skills, financial skills, and strategic skills are best positioned for actually taking the job on the top of the house.
And I guess also if supply chain function is evolving in this way, it would have to shed some of its traditional operations. I guess some of that could be liberation through new tech.
Probably you're right. Yes, you're right. And the question is about now companies changing. We've spoken about the new business models which are out there, where you see the merge between the physical world and the digitalization or the digital world and enabling technologies. You see that all, and companies now not only selling products and services, they sell solutions and outcomes. Now, that is a new complexity where organizations are dealing with, and that requires also certain changes. And like I said before, be crystal clear about the value proposition you're gonna have or you want to have as a business, and what it means in terms of the corresponding supply chain, and how now your supply chain or your different supply chains are delivering on the promise you make. And now, how do you deploy your resources in your organization more efficiently and effectively? That's what we are talking about.
I see. And do you think it would affect, sort of going forward, the training of supply chain officers?
Not only that, I believe it goes deeper than that. I believe it affects structures. It affects probably roles. It affects probably your whole recruiting process in terms of the skills you would need as an organization. It probably also will look at the talent development. Now, also going back to the example of the chief supply chain officer, in the past, he probably has been promoted based on his ability to bring in results based on how the operation performs. Right now, in the future, I think it will be more about the balance between how he is actually contributing to the overall results of that organization based on a strong operational performance, but also tying it back to more financial results of an organization, being top line, bottom line, and results or returns. And then also what kind of strategic skills he has in terms of taking the organization forward. So that's what we're talking. And now, obviously, that requires a new skill sets, probably new talents in our organization, probably also training which needs to be given, and opportunities for people to move into these kind of roles.
What would you describe as the kind of major obstacles to this kind of evolution of the role?
As usual, probably mindset as well as culture of organizations. Like I said, organizations, they have rewarded their people differently in the past. Now they need to overcome that and look at what that change means for them, and if they are ready from a maturity, but also from the company culture, to move and shift their paradigms to a more strategic supply chain, and also to a strategy-driven supply chain and value planning and execution model. So culture probably is the break in the wall.
And in your kind of vast knowledge of this, do you see any particular industry sectors where this is kind of accelerating a little bit than others?
Well, it's a very, very good question. I would say from my own perspective, it is that you would maybe see some of the industries a little bit ahead. Perhaps technology companies would be already a little bit ahead in terms of looking into that from a more strategic point of view. Also now combining that with enabling technology or technologies, because it's maybe even part of their business model. But overall, I would say that companies may be at a starting point of truly understanding that change needs to happen.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Insight Podcast in association with theinterface.net and cpostrategy.com. The Digital Insight is brought to you by B2E Media Limited. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and review, and don't forget to check out our podcast archive at www.b2e-media.com/podcast.